So, exactly how long did you live in Japan? Oh wait, about 18 years I'd say. Yes, nearly 2 decades. And how old were you when you left again? I was barely 16 or 17. An age when most teens think about driver's licenses or hanging out with friends. But I had a very different obsession. My thirst to learn ancestral martial arts, the secrets of plant-based healing, all that knowledge the Orient closely guarded. Certain legends, circulate silently in dojos. Stories whispered between training sessions, tales resembling those old VHS tapes warped by time, never quite confirmed, never fully debunked. Enigmas touching the very philosophy of combat. That idea of acting without acting, of defeating without striking. Losing you? Yes, I see in your eyes how nebulous it sounds. Take that persistent rumor about Steven Seagal. You've heard it, right? The one where 17-year-old Steven, still unknown in his small town of Fullerton, supposedly showed up at Bruce Lee's doorstep in 1970 to challenge him to a duel? An encounter that supposedly went badly for him. But is it even plausible? The dates barely match up, witnesses have vanished. And yet, this myth refuses to die. Picture the scene. It's 1970. Bruce Lee, already a living legend at 29, is feverishly working on his Hollywood projects. In his Culver City training garden, where the concepts of Jeet Kune Do were born, a teenager rings his doorbell unannounced. No letter, no phone call, just the wild audacity of youth. But what could drive this kid to cross half of California to challenge an icon? Some speak of misplaced pride, others of an initiatory quest. What's told is that Bruce, initially bewildered, ultimately accepted the challenge with a mix of amusement and irritation. The fight that followed resembled none from his films. A key witness emerged in 2023, appending everything. This man, claiming to be close to Seagal, recounted with a voice choked by emotion how Bruce supposedly dominated young Steven, with his hands behind his back. A chilling detail. In a few lightning-fast moves, the master allegedly floored the arrogant challenger, leaving him so battered that an ambulance was even called. Can you imagine? The creator of Jeet Kune Do, that philosopher of movement who repeated "be like water," delivering such a brutal lesson? Yet no official documents corroborate this account. No photos, no hospital records, nothing in the meticulous archives of Lee's biographers. Experts have scrutinized timelines. In 1970, Seagal had only just begun his Aikido training. Bruce Lee, meanwhile, was filming The Big Boss in Hong Kong. Could their paths have truly crossed in Culver City that year? Fans are divided. Some see this story as a metaphor for martial transmission. Others dismiss it as a fabricated hoax. And yet, this rumor lingers like gunpowder smoke after a shot. Perhaps because it resonates with our deepest fantasies. The secret clash between two eras, the collision of an overeager student and an immutable sage. Even Seagal's interviews are dissected. A grimace, an overlong silence become proof for some, lies for others. It all begins that day under the California sun. Bruce Lee, his body taut like a bow ready to loose steel arrows, is immersed in martial contemplation. His doorbell chimes, shattering his focus. Something in the young man's eyes on his doorstep tells him this afternoon won't be ordinary. Bruce Lee's training in the privacy of his California garden was a radically different experience from Hollywood choreographies. Far from cameras and spotlights, his sessions resembled a living laboratory where the raw essence of martial arts was tested. Surrounded by a select circle of students, disciples who saw him less as a mere instructor than as a philosopher of movement, Bruce refined his techniques with near-religious intensity. His famed Jeet Kune Do kicks sliced the air with mechanical precision, alternating between a dancer's grace and a rattlesnake's swiftness. That day, as dusk began tinting Culver City's sky, a sharp knock echoed at the front door. According to the now legendary testimony of a visitor present that day, the one knocking with unusual insistence was none other than a young Steven Seagal, accompanied by the witness himself. At the time, Seagal was just an ambitious teenager or barely of age, already radiating the arrogance that would define his future career. Fascinated by Bruce Lee's rising fame, he'd convinced his friend to join him on this impromptu expedition. Faced with silence after repeated knocks, The two men circled the property to access the garden from the rear. The space seemed modest, a simple concrete slab surrounded by rudimentary training equipment, but pulsed with an almost palpable energy. There, in this open-air dojo, Bruce and his companions were engaged in intense sparring, utterly absorbed in their martial ritual. The intruder's arrival instantly fractured the concentrated atmosphere. From his imposing height of 6'1", Seagal stepped forward with calculated assurance. His bow was not that of a respectful student, but rather of a throne claimant. "I wish to test myself against you," he reportedly declared, challenging the legend on his own turf. Witnesses describe a suspended moment when even birds seemed to cease singing. Bruce, interrupted mid-sequence, slowly turned his gaze toward the intruder. In his eyes lay not anger, but curiosity tinged with amused disbelief. The young man's audacity bordered on insult within this sanctuary governed by rigorous discipline. Lee, known for his contempt of braggarts and almost scientific approach to martial arts, would normally have dismissed such a provocateur. But that day, perhaps intrigued by the visitor's nerve, he accepted the challenge with an imperceptible nod. No ceremonial bow, no warning, just a slight weight shift that instantly altered the spatial dynamic. Seagal, trained in traditional Aikido where every movement counters a specific attack, assumed a rigid combat stance. His muscles strained against his jacket fabric, his fixed gaze betraying absolute concentration. Facing him, Bruce appeared almost relaxed, hands casually clasped behind his back as during a Sunday stroll. This non-stance was paradoxically the most dangerous, a blank canvas where any unpredictable movement could materialize instantly. The confrontation erupted in cathedral silence. The initial exchange lasted less than 3 seconds yet left spectators permanently marked. Bruce's foot sprang like a hidden coil, striking Seagal's forearm with metronomic precision. The young Aikidoka tried seizing the leg to apply a joint lock but grasped only ere Lee had already retracted the limb with disconcerting speed. Each of Seagal's attacks met this elusive fluidity, like trying to capture mercury with tongs. Eyewitnesses describe a near-surreal scene. The hulking figure in black jacket advancing methodically like a bulldozer, facing a dancing silhouette that transformed every evasion into lightning counterattacks. Bruce's kicks cracked like dry detonations, alternating between destabilizing low strikes and circular whips that hissed millimeters from his opponent's face. The garden resonated with this brutal ballet where Seagal's labored breathing contrasted with Lee's near-meditative silence. What struck observers most, beyond pure speed, was Bruce's economy of motion. While his adversary expended considerable energy in each technique, Lee seemed to draw from an inexhaustible inner well, his movements refined to their essence. A lateral shift of mere centimeters caused a devastating punch to land where nobody stood. A slight hip rotation transformed a dodge into a thunderous heel strike. The confrontation, if one could call this asymmetrical demonstration a fight, reached its climax when Bruce, after letting his opponent exhaust himself in futile attacks, decided to conclude the lesson. In one fluid motion that defied biomechanics, he chained a low feint with an open-hand strike that froze a hair's breadth from Seagal's neck. Time seemed to halt its flight, every witness holding their breath before this motionless blade. In the pregnant silence, Bruce held the position several extra seconds, his gaze piercing the young man's as if to etch this instant into his memory. The execution seemed deceptively simple. Every Bruce Lee movement flashed like lightning, his kicks slicing air from impossible angles that defied anticipation. Facing this orchestrated storm, Seagal lost footing both literally and figuratively. His balance, honed through years of martial practice, shattered under this rain of living steel. What struck hardest was the economy of means. Bruce's hands remained casually clasped behind his back, as if barely deigning to use them against such an opponent. His legs became autonomous weapons, whips of surgical precision striking hips, ribs and thighs with metronomic regularity. When Seagal desperately tried closing distance, new strikes instantly repelled him, each counter measured to the millimeter. The deployed power held nothing bestial. It was channeled, purified energy transforming every impact into shockwaves traversing Seagal's body. His Aikido techniques, usually so effective at redirecting force, proved utterly useless. How could one parry what resembled a tidal wave more than conventional attacks? Then came the final sequence. A lightning low kick struck Seagal's thigh with a dull thud, buckling his knee like a reed. Before pain could register, a roundhouse kick swept his other leg. The massive man collapsed heavily, his body a tapestry of bruises. The ensuing silence felt palpable, broken only by the defeated man's shallow breaths. Bruce Lee retreated 3 steps, face impassive. No triumph in his gaze, only the cold certainty of duty fulfilled. His departure proved as eloquent as his combat, a wordless vanishing act without backward glance, leaving the stunned gathering digesting this relentless demonstration. The witnesses exchanged perplexed glances. Had they come to witness a mere technical exchange, a cruel lesson, or the birth of a personal vendetta? Seagal's friend finally rushed toward the motionless body, shattering the electric tension that had gripped the garden. Decades later, the enigma persisted. In 2012, during an interview with journalist Michael Chavel, Steven Seagal finally addressed the subject with measured words. His account portrayed Bruce Lee as affable, almost brotherly, recalling family gatherings where the two men supposedly compared their children. "Bruce found our sons strikingly similar," Seagal claimed, describing intimate scenes where young Brandon Lee played nearby. Yet this touching anecdote contained a glaring flaw. Brandon Lee was born in 1965, while Seagal's first child arrived only in 1975, a full decade later, when Bruce had already left this world. How could the Jeet Kune Do master have commented on the resemblance between children separated by 10 years? This temporal contradiction cast doubt over Seagal's recollections, fueling speculation. Was it a deliberate lie, an unconscious memory adjustment, or proof this entire story was an urban legend? Martial arts historians noted another troubling detail. If this fight truly occurred, why had none of Bruce Lee's inner circle, devoted students like Taiki Kimura or Dan Inosanto, ever mentioned it? The mystery deepened upon examination, like a riddle with no definitive solution. Yet one certainty emerged from the mists of time. This encounter, real or imagined, had profoundly marked Seagal. In his later demonstrations, some detected a hidden obsession, a way of moving, of striking, that seemed to answer the ghost of a rival never truly vanquished. As if, through perfecting his art, he secretly sought to create the perfect counterpoint to that original defeat. But then, how to explain these blatant contradictions in Seagal's account? Was it simply memory distorted by time, or deliberate rewriting to forge legitimacy within martial arts' insular world? The mystery takes an unsettling turn when realizing no Bruce Lee associate, friends, students, or collaborators ever corroborated the story. Not a single written trace, no archival photos, not even an anecdote in official biographies. Even training circles of that era, normally so vocal about their idols' feats, maintain absolute silence about this alleged fight. Consider the context. Early 1970s, Bruce Lee navigated a pivotal period. After years of extreme training that nearly broke his body, remember that catastrophic 1970 back injury from doing good mornings without warming up? He reinvented his practice. Bedridden for 6 months, he transformed adversity into revolution, refining Jeet Kune Do principles, that fluid style rejecting traditional rigidity. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, filming The Big Boss would soon catapult him into action cinema's pantheon, a meteoric career keeping him away from the US for months. And Seagal? His trajectory during this era resembles a puzzle with missing pieces. Records show that after cutting short high school, young Steven arrived in Japan in 1971, just 1 year after Bruce's devastating injury. There, and nowhere else, he began serious Aikido training under Master Saisiki Abe, a discipline radically different from Lee's Chinese martial arts, based on harmony rather than direct confrontation. No credible account places Seagal in a California dojo before this date, certainly not at Bruce's innovative Culver City school. Yet one geographical detail sustains doubt. Between 1969 to 1971, their paths could theoretically have crossed in Southern California. Bruce maintained his Culver City residence and dojo between Hong Kong film shoots, while Seagal lived in Fullerton, barely an hour's drive away. A minuscule spatio-temporal coincidence, yet enough to feed speculation. Imagine two future martial arts legends moving through the same demographic basin, leaving no tangible evidence of meeting. Danny Inosanto's lingering shadow deepens the enigma. As Bruce Lee's devoted disciple and uncompromising legacy keeper, he knew every visitor to the Culver City dojo. Not only did he never mention Seagal's presence, but a troubling confusion exists. Some accounts attribute similar confrontation memories to Inosanto himself, an overlapping of legends that further muddies the waters. Could Seagal have encountered Inosanto instead of Lee? A case of mistaken identity transformed into heroic narrative over time? The history of martial arts is full of legends, but sometimes the line between reality and fiction becomes a bit too blurred. Take this famous rumor that's circulated for years, an alleged secret fight between Steven Seagal and Bruce Lee. It all starts with a simple movie scene. In 1991's Out for Justice, Seagal briefly faces off against Danny Inosanto, a true Eskrima master and close collaborator of Bruce Lee. On screen, it's a clash of styles between Aikido and Filipino martial arts. But off-screen, this sequence planted the seeds of a much larger misunderstanding. Things escalate when, during an interview with Schiavello, Seagal mentions his admiration for Bruce Lee. He speaks of mutual respect, the legendary sidekick, and an indirect connection through their mutual friend James Coburn. Nothing more. Yet, like a giant game of telephone, these remarks get distorted. Out-of-context snippets circulate, influencers add their sensationalist spin, and suddenly the myth of an actual physical confrontation between the two men is born. But let's dig deeper. When we examine the timelines, the story starts crumbling like old plaster. Bruce Lee tragically died in July 1973. Yet, according to Seagal's own accounts and available records, he only seriously immersed himself in Aikido starting in the mid-1970s. Picture this. While Lee was perfecting his Jeet Kune Do in Los Angeles, Seagal, then in his 20s, was far from being the expert we know today. Technically, even if they'd crossed paths, Seagal would have been just a beginner facing a martial genius at the peak of his craft. Now consider Bruce Lee's inner circle. His wife Linda, his disciple Dan Inosanto, who actually fought Seagal in Out for Justice, or Taiki Kimura, his lifelong friend and training partner, all have shared thousands of anecdotes about Lee. His challenges, his epic training sessions, even his tempers. But never, absolutely never, has any of them mentioned the slightest altercation with Seagal. And these were people who lived in his daily intimacy. If an incident involving an ambulance, as some wild versions claim, had occurred, trust me, it would have left traces. Then there's Bruce Lee's own personality. The man documented everything with near-obsessive rigor. His training notebooks overflow with strike diagrams, philosophical reflections, and lists of challengers. Nothing escaped his attention to detail. So how do we explain the absence of any mention of a confrontation with a future Hollywood star? Even in his 1971 to 1973 interviews, the period when Seagal supposedly could have met him, Lee doesn't breathe a word about such an episode. Finally, look at the family angle. Brandon Lee, Bruce's son, was 8 years old when his father passed. At that time, Seagal had just started his own family. The two men moved in completely different spheres, with no mentor-student link or professional rivalry. This further isolates the rumor in the realm of pure fantasy. So why does this legend persist? Perhaps because it fits too neatly with the image of the undefeated warrior some want to attach to Bruce Lee. Or because the idea of a clash between two cinema icons fuels dreams. But in reality, as often happens, the truth is less spectacular and far more human. Two martial artists who admired each other from afar, a media misunderstanding, and the passage of time. These are the real ingredients of this story. Imagine for a moment, if Bruce Lee had actually faced Steven Seagal in a secret fight, how could such an event have stayed hidden? Bruce documented everything, his training, his philosophical musings, his martial challenges. An altercation leading to an opponent's retirement or injury would have left an indelible mark in his notebooks. His close collaborators, like Dan Inosanto or Taiki Kimura, would have surely spoken of it. Yet nothing. No mention in his personal archives, no echo in testimonies from that era. This lack of tangible evidence becomes even more striking when examining the timeline. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the presumed period of this legendary duel, Seagal was honing his Aikido in Japan. Bruce, meanwhile, was already revolutionizing Hollywood's martial arts landscape. Their geographical and professional paths simply didn't cross. How could two such iconic figures have fought without a single credible witness emerging decades later? But beyond the facts, it's Seagal's own silence that intrigues. For years, he's spoken of Bruce Lee with strange ambivalence. Never direct criticism, but a series of calculated insinuations. In a memorable 1998 interview, he stated, "Some actors know how to simulate martial arts. I've lived them," a line that seemed to draw an invisible boundary between his experience and Bruce's. This latent rivalry takes on the air of a Hollywood psychodrama. Seagal, the fluid, circular Aikido expert, versus the ghost of Bruce Lee, symbol of explosive, direct Jeet Kune Do. Two opposing martial philosophies, two eras that never truly met. Yet Seagal seems obsessed with this inevitable comparison. He openly criticizes Van Damme for lacking martial credibility, mocks Michael J. White stunts, but when it comes to Bruce Lee, an eloquent silence, punctuated by enigmatic half-smiles. What stands out is the contradiction in his behavior. On one hand, he pays homage to Bruce as a pioneer of action cinema. On the other, he methodically deconstructs Bruce's legacy by constantly opposing spectacle to the reality of combat, a distinction he never makes when discussing his own films, as if attempting to position himself as the guardian of martial authenticity that Bruce, in his view, sacrificed on the altar of commercial success. Those close to Bruce offer a fascinating perspective. According to Linda Lee Cadwell, his widow, Bruce considered every confrontation a lesson, never a trophy. If he had dominated anyone, he would have spoken of it with humility, as an exchange between practitioners, she revealed in 2012. This lack of boastfulness starkly contrasts with Seagal's attitude, which seems fueled by a perpetual need for validation. One might see this as a modern Icarus complex. Seagal flies high enough to reach fame yet remains dazzled by the son of a legend he cannot surpass. His 1990s films like Under Siege or Exit Wounds borrow heavily from Bruce Lee's aesthetic while trying to distinguish themselves through harsher realism. A telling duality, homage and competition fused in every fight scene. Some psychologists might detect Freudian projection here. The myth of their secret fight becomes a symbolic outlet. Seagal would be battling not Bruce Lee the man, but Bruce Lee the untouchable icon. A way to exorcise the anxiety of influence described by Harold Bloom, where every